They said no one survived on Tersia IV, no heat, no signals. Nothing. But deep beneath that dead ice, she was still there, eyes closed, breath paused, body untouched. And when he knelt beside her frozen tomb, he didn't understand why he cried. Only that his tears began to thaw the impossible. They said no one survived on Tersia IV, no heat, no signals. No movement since the bombardment. The surface was a vast continent of ice, sharp and pale, winds dragging stinging snow like blades across the wreckage of once proud alien towers. Nothing but ghosts remained there, or so they told him. But when Elias Meyer stepped off the landing ramp of the salvage crawler, something in the cold felt wrong. Not hostile, not even eerie, just waiting. The wind was screaming already, biting through his outer gear despite the thermal mesh. The other technicians cursed overcomes, hustling toward the marked excavation site, where they'd be cutting into a partially collapsed alien dome beneath the ice sheet. It was supposed to be a routine recovery scan, the ruins, lift any functioning. Alien tech, extract the core crystals, and go home. No engagement, no exploration. Definitely no digging where they weren't paid to dig, but something pulled him east. He didn't tell the others. He just walked first to check the tether lines, then a bit farther, then beyond the crawl zone. It was stupid, sure. His supervisor would dock him a full pay grade if he found out. But something just beneath the surface humming. Not too. His ears, but somewhere behind his sternum. A kind of vibration that made no logical sense, not from the ice, not from buried machinery. Just a persistent tug like a breath being held by something enormous below. By the time Elias realized how far he'd wandered, he was nearly a kilometer from the main dig. The wind had died down, oddly. The snow here lay smoother, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. His boots crunched over the pale crust, his scanner pinging a low-frequency anomaly just 20 meters beneath. Then 10, then 5. He fell to his knees and brushed at the snow without knowing why. Something glittered underneath, not ice. A clear panel, scratched but intact. He blinked and leaned closer. There was something behind it, a shape. Noah. Figure, a body, curled inside a crystalline chamber embedded in the frozen ground. It was shaped like a coffin, but longer. Sleeker, and inside it, impossibly preserved, lay a girl. No, not just a girl. Something about her made that word too small. She was beautiful, yes, but in a way that made beauty irrelevant. Her skin was pale violet beneath the frost, and a circlet of dark metal curled around her forehead like a crown. A gossamer cape floated behind her in zero gravity, still suspended in stasis. Symbols pulsed faintly along the inside of the glass. Alien letters. Her hands were folded over her chest, resting on a crystal orb that emitted the faintest internal glow. Elias stared. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Couldn't. A timer blinked red on his HUD. His oxygen would deplete in 22 minutes if he didn't start walking back, but he didn't walk. His breath fogged the inside of his helmet as he leaned forward, resting a gloved hand on the glass. The girl didn't stir. Of course not. The ice didn't melt. The signals didn't change. But for reasons Elias couldn't explain, not to himself, not to any command officer, his eyes began to burn. His throat clenched. And when the first tear rolled down his cheek, it didn't make a sound. It simply dropped, hit the inside of the helmet with a flick, and hovered. But below him, something shifted. It started as a vibration in the glass, then a pulse in the orb beneath her hands. The sigils along the containment pod brightened slowly at first, then accelerating like a heartbeat. The ice around the chamber began to thin, steam hissing out in delicate threads. Elias pulled back. Instinctively, heart pounding, eyes wide. The pod's temperature readout on his scanner was rising. She was warming. He scrambled to his feet, looking around as if expecting someone to see. No one was there. His cum crackled. Someone was calling his name, angry and distorted, but he didn't answer. He knelt again and placed both hands on the pod, staring. Through the frost as her lips parted slightly. Not in breath, not yet, but in response, like someone surfacing from a dream. That's when it hit him, who she was. She wasn't just any alien. He recognized the crest on her collar. The stories. were old, blurred by propaganda and fear, but every child on Earth had seen them, the alien princess of the High Empire, the last daughter of the galaxy's most advanced civilization. Executed at the war's end, or so the victors claimed. But here she was, not dead, not decayed, sealed away like a secret no one wanted found. Elias didn't know what he was supposed to do. Wake her, leave her, report her, and let the fleet finish what it started decades ago? He knew what command would do. They'd glass the site, bury it in orbital fire, and erase the evidence. Because peace had only been won by destroying her people, their history, their throne. She wasn't a person to them. She was a memory too. Dangerous to let live. But as he stared at her again, he didn't see a threat. He saw someone forgotten, abandoned, left to freeze in the dark with a name no one spoke anymore. He opened his satchel and removed the emergency thermal coil, pressed it against the ice above the pod, and activated it. The hum of the heater grew louder as the pod's surface began to clear. Her face came into full view, sharp cheekbones, closed eyes, hair like silver thread floating behind her. She looked younger than the stories described. Or maybe the stasis had kept her ageless. "Can you hear me?" he whispered, knowing it was pointless. "Are you still in there?" No answer. Just a flicker of movement in the orb under her fingers. Suddenly the pod let out a soft chime. The stasis systems were reacting. The temperature reached threshold. Elias stood back as the outer shell of the pod folded open like petals, steam pouring out in slow waves. The cold air rushed back in, and then her chest rose. Just once, but it was enough. Her eyes didn't open, but her fingers twitched. Pulse fluttered faintly in her neck. And for a terrible, suspended moment, Elias believed he had done something beautiful and irreversible. Then the ground shook. A low warning blared in his helmet seismic shift. Not an earthquake, a signal. Something had awakened with her. The vibration wasn't just local, it was planetary. A beacon, maybe, a fail-safe. Her tomb had been built as more than a hiding place, it was a trigger. He backed away quickly, heart hammering. His cum lit up again, this time clearer. "Elias, where the hell are you? We've got tremors across the site." "Return to the crawler now." He didn't respond. Not yet. The alien princess lay motionless, breath shallow but real. Her eyes still closed. Her hand, barely visible, reached slightly toward the air. As if searching? He knelt beside her once more, helmet only inches from her face. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I won't let them find you. Not again." And somewhere deep below, the frozen crust of Tersia IV, something ancient stirred in answer. Elias didn't sleep that night. Not that sleep came easily on Tersia IV. No day, no night. Just a dim gray haze that clung to the atmosphere like dust over a dead star. But even if the planet had offered rest, he wouldn't have taken it. His mind churned in silence as the salvage team continued its routine like nothing had changed. No one knew what he'd found. The scans hadn't picked up the buried tomb because it was shielded by alien tech older than human science could even name. He hadn't logged its coordinates, hadn't marked it in any system. It lived only in his memory and in the frost, still clinging to his boots. All night he sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the tablet screen in his lap, pretending to review reactor specs while replaying the memory of her chest rising, her fingers twitching, that faint pulse of life, where there should have been none. He didn't tell anyone, not even Cade, the closest thing he had to a friend on this ship. Cade was too loyal to the mission, too rule-bound. If Elias told him the truth, he'd report it within the hour, and command would vaporize the site before sunrise. No, this was something Elias had to carry alone, at least for now. At first light, though light was only a suggestion on Tersia IV, he prepped his gear, ran a fake diagnostic on the crawler's external antenna, and logged a solo repair. Sortie. No one questioned him. They had bigger problems. Someone had triggered a buried tremor the previous day, and the engineers were still trying to stabilize the tunnels under the main ruin. Perfect cover. He trekked east again, this time more quickly, with fewer stops. His path had vanished under fresh wind-blown snow, but he didn't need markers. The pull was still there, faint and invisible, dragging at something deep inside him like a compass tuned to memory instead of magnetism. When he reached the spot, the pod was just as he'd left it, half-buried, crystal shell exposed. The alien princess still resting in her stasis cradle, but the pod had changed. Her vitals, if the lights could be trusted, had stabilized. She was warmer now. Color had returned to her face. Not human color, but that soft violet luminescence that shimmered faintly beneath her skin like starlight. Underwater. Her lips were parted slightly as though caught mid-breath, and her fingers had unfurled around the glowing orb. The orb itself was pulsing, now slow, regular beats like a heartbeat translated into light. Elias knelt beside her, breath caught in his chest. He removed one glove, letting the warmth from the coil brush his skin, and reached forward slowly, carefully until his fingertips touched the glass. She didn't move, but the orb brightened. Her eyes didn't open, but her breathing changed, deeper, more natural. Something in the pod responded to his presence. It was like the system recognized him, not as a threat, but as familiar. He didn't understand it. But somehow his nearness seemed to ease her revival. Perhaps the pod had been programmed to remain dormant unless a non-hostile life form was detected. Or perhaps the alien princess had chosen him. That thought sent a shiver down his spine, equal parts awe and fear. He checked the environmental shield he'd rigged, still holding. The pod was insulated from the outside air, safe for now. But it wouldn't last forever. He had to move her, hide her. Do something. He pulled up his scanner and ran a surface-level analysis. Moving the pod would require power too much to draw from his portable coil. But if he could run a line from the crawler's auxiliary cell, he could warm the ground enough to dig beneath the cradle and slide it free. It would take hours, maybe days. But it could work. He was already sketching the plan in his head when he heard her voice, not a voice exactly. More like a thought that arrived too clearly to be his own. A whisper that bypassed language and logic, carried not by sound but by sensation. Cold. Then warmth. Then a single word, why? He froze. Looked down, her eyes were still closed, her body unmoving. But the word was real. It echoed in his mind like a bell rung in still air. He didn't know what to say. Could she hear him? He leaned closer, heart pounding. Because you shouldn't be alone, he whispered aloud. The wind shifted suddenly, pushing snow in whirls around the pod, and then stilled again as if the planet itself had paused to listen. Then came the second whisper, pain. The thought carried weight. Not just the meaning, but the memory behind it. Buried cities, fire from the sky, screams in a language he didn't know. He clutched the side of the pod, steadying himself. She was dreaming, he realized. Not sleeping, but trapped between worlds, drifting in a memory she couldn't escape. You're safe now, he said, uncertain if she could hear, if the words even mattered. They can't hurt you here. Another breath, her fingers twitched again. He reached out, this time letting his bare palm rest gently on the surface of the pod. It was warmer than before. The hum of the orb synced with the beat of his heart. She wasn't just a relic. She wasn't just surviving, she was responding. Somehow, some ancient bond, biological, emotional, something far beyond his comprehension had formed between them. She was tethered to him now. Or perhaps he was tethered to her. He didn't know how long he sat there. Time lost its shape. All he knew was the silence was no longer cold. The air no longer hostile. The ice felt less like a grave and more like a cathedral, vast and quiet and holy. But reality returned with the shrill tone of his cum unit. Elias, do you copy? Unscheduled? Movement on surface grid 9-2, respond. He swallowed hard, stood, and turned away from the pod to activate his mic. Copy base, minor seismic settling, no structural damage. I'm en route back. A pause. Then, your beacon's pinged twice in 30 minutes. Stay on task. We're logging this detour. Understood, he replied, already switching it. Off again, he looked back at the pod. At her, the alien princess hadn't moved, her presence still subtle, still delicate. But she was awake in ways that didn't need eyes or breath. She knew he was there, and he was beginning to understand what that meant. She didn't just need protection, she needed time. Time to fully return. Time to heal from whatever pain lingered in her dreams. Time to remember who she was. And Elias, for reasons he couldn't name, was willing to give her that time whatever it cost. Even if it meant lying to his crew. Even if it meant defying command. Even if it meant exile or worse. Because the truth had melted through the ice the moment he saw her, she wasn't a threat. She was a wound the galaxy had tried to forget. And he might be the only one left who cared enough to help her heal. The plan should have failed. Elias knew that. There were too many variables equipment not rated for this temperature. Sensors too sensitive, patrol patterns too erratic, but somehow, across the next 2 days, he pulled it off. Each morning, he logged solo excursions with false maintenance reports. Each night, he stayed awake sketching modifications to his dig tools and power cells, recalibrating cables and adjusting thermal shields to keep the alien princess stable while he excavated the pod from its icy cradle. The snowdrifts helped. They covered his tracks, softened his silhouette against the horizon. No drones flew this far out, and none of the crew cared to wander beyond their assignment radius. It was as if the world itself had conspired to give him space. Below the ice, she continued to stir. Her pod responded more actively with each visit, subtle shifts in light, warmth, and rhythm. He could feel her breathing now when he laid his palm against the glass. Not in a mechanical way, not like reading vitals on a scanner, but in a deeply human way, steady, soft, almost familiar. Her psychic voice hadn't returned since that first day, but he sensed her consciousness pressing closer, circling the edge of awareness like a swimmer near the surface. She was rising, slowly, steadily, but so were the risks. The tremors her pod had triggered hadn't gone unnoticed. Command issued a remote scan from orbit. The crawler team was ordered to stay longer, to dig deeper. A geological probe was inbound. If it landed anywhere near the eastern ridge, they'd find the buried site. They'd find her, and they'd kill her. Elias worked faster. He tunneled beneath the pod using a modified grav anchor to dislodge the permafrost without cracking the shell. When the final layer gave way, he slipped a hover pad beneath the cradle and activated the field. The pod rose in silence, humming. Faintly, its lights flickering like a heartbeat waking from a long coma. He covered the empty depression with snow, scattered the area with fake impact debris, and guided the hovering pod west beneath the old service tracks. Every step felt impossible. The ground threatened collapse. The hover field flickered twice. His oxygen dipped dangerously low once, forcing him to crouch, gasping as he stabilized her weight. But by the end of the 4th hour, he reached the ruins of the auxiliary hangar abandoned since the war, untouched by salvage teams. The roof was half collapsed, and snow fell through the cracks in lazy spirals, but the interior still held dry corners and unpowered terminals. It was perfect. Hidden, insulated, forgotten, he positioned the pod in the shadow of a crumbled support beam and rerouted a heater coil from a dead drone to keep her temperature stable. The hum of the orb inside her pod grew louder. That night, while the crew slept and the crawler's reactor thrummed in the distance, Elias sat beside her and watched the lights on the pod cycle through unfamiliar colors. Then she opened her eyes. No warning, no noise. Just the soft shift of lashes and the slow rise of violet irises glowing faintly in the dark. Elias froze. He didn't move, didn't speak. He hardly breathed. Her gaze was unfocused, at first distant. Inward, like someone halfway through a dream, but it locked onto his face with sudden clarity. They stared at each other in the half-light, human and alien, two ghosts from different sides of a war no one even remembered accurately. Then her lips parted and she exhaled. The pod adjusted, translating her breath into a soft resonance that vibrated through the chamber. Her voice followed not in sound, but thought. Not language, but emotion, a pulse of memory. A feeling. Not words, not yet. But he understood. You are not my enemy. Elias swallowed. No, he said aloud, voice cracking. I'm not. She blinked, slow and heavy. Her eyes shimmered. The orb beneath her hands pulsed once more, and he felt the Sensation passed through his spine like a chord being struck. The pod's translation interface kicked in dim holographics, sparking, ancient tech reaching for human comprehension. Fragments of symbols floated in the air above her, shifting as if trying to find a shape his mind could grasp. Then her voice, this time soft and melodic, filled the space between them. "Where are my people?" Elias bowed his head. "Gone," he whispered. "The war ended, a long time ago." Silence. Her eyelids trembled and the orb dimmed. Her breath caught like a sigh breaking under weight. Then she spoke again. "They buried me?" "Yes," you cried. "Yes, why?" He hesitated. "Because you were still alive." She studied him, those glowing eyes unblinking. And though her face showed little expression, he could feel something shifting beneath the surface, questions forming, memories stirring, pain returning. "You should have left me," she said quietly. "I didn't want to," he replied. "You? You didn't deserve to die like that, alone." The pod shifted slightly. The orb dimmed again, and she closed her eyes for a long moment. When they opened again, they looked older, sadder, far too heavy for someone so still. "My name," she said. "Do you know it?" Elias shook his head. "No, they erased everything." "Your name, your history, your language?" "All I know is what I see, and I see someone who shouldn't be forgotten." Her gaze softened, and something in her shoulders released a tension, a readiness to fight that she now realized wasn't needed. She sank back against the cradle and closed her eyes again, but this time not from weakness, from trust. A quiet between them settled into place. He sat there until his legs ached, until the heaters hummed low, until snow rattled softly against the ruined roof like the whisper of a dead planet breathing. When he finally stood to leave, she spoke one last time, not in thought, but aloud. Her voice was strange and elegant, like wind over glass. "Zariah," he turned. "That is my name," she said. "I give it to you." He held the moment in silence, then bowed, hand over heart. "Zariah." And when he said it, something ancient in the room responded. A tone in the air shifted. The pod glowed warmer. The ground beneath them pulsed once, faintly, as though her name carried a code the planet had long been waiting to hear again. He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew one thing with perfect clarity. The moment her name returned to the world, she stopped being forgotten. She became real again. And everything would change because of it. Elias never returned to the crawler base. The day after Zariah spoke her name, the atmosphere around the abandoned hangar changed, warmer, deeper, charged with a strange energy he couldn't name but could feel tightening in his bones like gravity had shifted its meaning. He had brought her back, yes, but something about saying her name aloud had awakened not just the alien princes, but something older. Something woven into the bedrock of this frozen planet, into the core of her kind's long-buried memory. He saw it first, in the light. Not daylight, but a faint shimmer in the snow, like sunlight refracted through crystal, even though no sun had broken the clouds. The wind changed too, less biting, almost musical, brushing past the ruined hangar as if it had a purpose. Zariah remained inside her pod, but each hour she grew stronger. The lights around her pulsed in clean harmony now. Her voice no longer needed translation. She spoke in English not perfectly, but enough to make Elias pause and realize that she had once studied humanity long before she was ever entombed beneath this world. "You call it mourning," she said quietly one morning. "We called it the long silence, a ritual when a bloodline ended. But I am the last of mine." He nodded, unsure how to comfort someone who had outlived her entire civilization. "You're not alone anymore," he said instead. She watched him with unreadable eyes, then reached a hand against the inside of the glass. He didn't hesitate. He placed his hand to hers, warmth bleeding through the barrier. And that was the first time she smiled, not with her lips, but with a slight tilt of her head, a visible softening around the eyes that meant more than any word. That moment did not last, because the probe landed at dawn. It dropped into the valley with a soundless pulse, its seismic readings instantly detecting the disturbance Elias had worked so hard to disguise. He knew the crawler crew would be redirected. He knew command would come in person this time, He knew they'd find her. But he wasn't going to run, not this time. Zariah sat up in her pod as the ground began to rumble, her body visibly stronger. Her skin had color now, her breath steady, and her aura the shimmer that always danced faintly around her like dew-catching moonlight brightened when he told her the truth. "They're coming," he said. She didn't flinch. "To destroy what they fear. Yes, they will not listen." "No, but you still stay." Elias looked at her, then at the pod, then at his hands calloused, cracked, trembling slightly. Not leaving you," he said simply, "even if it kills me." Something ancient stirred behind her eyes. "Then you will be remembered beside me, not as soldier, not as human, but as the one who wept." And that was when the orb in her pod fully activated. The ice beneath them cracked not violently, but with a sound like the slow parting of old grief. Light bled upward, thin at first, then growing a column of gentle golden radiance that poured through the cracks in the hangar roof. Elias staggered back as the air shimmered, thickening into a field of color he could barely comprehend. It wasn't weaponry, it wasn't defense. It was memory projected, raw, ancestral. Visions bloomed in the air, her people walking through silver forests, her kind floating over oceans filled with light. Children with glowing hands building cities into moons. And then the war, the human incursion, the burning of stars, the betrayal of treaties that had long since faded from Earth's records. He saw her then, Zariah, standing before a tribunal of humans, not as a prisoner but as an emissary. She had begged for peace. They had buried her for it. "I remember now," she whispered. "The trial, the silence, the chamber they sealed me in." Elias said nothing. He watched the flickering echoes dissolve, each image collapsing into static before fading to nothing. "They thought I was dangerous," she murmured. "But they were wrong. I was the key." "To what?" he asked. She looked at him, not like someone looking at an enemy or a savior, but like someone finally seeing another soul clearly. "Balance," she said. "The war made everything unsteady. The universe forgot its symmetry. I was the last measure." He didn't pretend to understand fully, but he knew one thing. If they took her again, the universe would lose something irreplaceable. The first crawler arrived in the evening, an advance team of 2 scouts, armed, curious, cautious. They noticed the melted snow first, then the light. Elias stepped out before they could raise weapons. "You don't want to go in there," he said, blocking the shattered doorway with his frame. The lead scout hesitated. "Elias, you disappeared. Command flagged you. What the hell is going on?" He didn't answer. "Not directly. There's someone inside," he said. "Someone important." "Someone alive? You mean a survivor?" The second scout raised his scanner, but it sparked uselessly. The field around the hangar disrupted everything. "Not human," Elias said. That made them raise their weapons. "You're harboring one of them?" The first scout's voice cracked into disbelief. "Elias, that's treason." "She was buried alive," Elias snapped. "We buried her. And she's not a threat, she's a warning. We end her again. We end ourselves." They didn't believe him, of course. Why would they? They were trained to treat aliens as remnants, relics at best, failed experiments, at worst latent threats. But the ground decided for them. A second pulse echoed from the hangar's heart, and a tower of aurora-colored light shot straight into the clouded sky. Above them, the clouds split into rings. Every come in 100-mile radius died. Then she stepped out. Zariah didn't emerge as a queen or prisoner. She emerged as herself barefoot on the fractured snow, her body wrapped in strands of living light, her hair lifting softly in an unfelt breeze. The scouts fell silent, weapons dipped. She looked at them, and though she said nothing, her presence spoke volumes. They felt her grief, history, radiance, mercy. One of them knelt. The other simply walked backward, eyes wide with something like shame. When the fleet finally arrived, carriers, drones, the brass and the fearful, they found not a standoff but a vigil. Elias stood beside her. The snow had stopped falling. The ice was still melting. One of the commanders tried to speak, but Zariah Silence them with a single word spoken like a bell tolling the end of an age. Remember, and the air split open. The planet, long buried in silence, bloomed. Not in color, but in memory. A wave of knowing swept through the fleet. Visions of old treaties. Faces of children killed in first contact. Documents signed, promises broken. Not guilt, just clarity. The truth laid bare. No one fired a shot. How could they? For the first time in centuries, humanity saw what it had buried. Zariah turned to Elias, her aura dimming slightly, settling into a more human glow. "They will not harm me now," she said, "but I am tired." He nodded. "Then rest. I'll stay here, watch over this place." She tilted her head. "You cannot remain. The field will collapse. This world, it was only holding itself together through me. Then take me with you." He didn't even hesitate. Her gaze flickered with something unreadable, grief, awe, affection, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched his chest. "Your heart," she whispered. "It remembers things your people forgot." And then light surrounded them both. The snow beneath their feet glowed. The ice cracked in a perfect circle, but not from heat from release. When the last echoes of the ancient signal faded, they were gone. No explosion, no trace. Just melted. Snow, quiet air, and a stillness that was not loss, but peace. And so the story passed into history, not as a war, not as a scandal, but as a turning. The hangar became sacred ground. The scouts never spoke of what they saw. But every year, when the skies above that planet shimmer in unnatural colors, people whisper about the one who stayed behind, not to fight, not to win, but to weep. And in doing so to remember.